So another week of living Parsha, and we are finishing the book of Exodus, the book of Shemais, with the very last portion, Pekudei. And it's a seemingly kind of boring Parsha for the most part, on the surface, very detail-oriented, and we're completing the section of the Mishkan. So for the last 5 weeks, we have been going through an exhaustive list of the Mishkan, and we're capping it off this week with Pekudei. So I'm going to go through quickly the parasha and then focus on a few interesting things today that I think stand out. May not all tie into one big theme, but I think they're all very interesting points. Sorry, there's someone texting me for the class. Okay, so Pekudei means an accounting, in numbers. The book of Bamidbar, the fourth book of Torah, which is called in English Numbers, comes from the term, the Talmud called a Sefer Pekudim. So Pekudim means numbers, accounting. And Moses, at the beginning of the portion, gives an accounting for all the donations that were made to the Mishkan and justifies all of it. And so he says, this amount of gold came in, this is what it was used for. This amount of silver came in, this is what it was used for. This amount of copper came in. As he goes through the numbers, it's almost like an Excel sheet where he is giving a report to his donors and saying, these are the nations, this is what we've done with it, this is the achievements, and your money has been well spent and allocated and accounted for. Which almost seems a little strange. Like, why was Moses giving a very detailed accounting to the Jewish people? And the Midrash says something fascinating. The Midrash says that Moses was not immune to rumors and whispers among the community. And people were saying, Moses got rich off this fundraising drive. He's collecting gold and silver and precious metals and jewels and materials and dyes. Suddenly he's driving a new Ferrari. He got a new BMW. There started rumors about the rabbi, Moses, that he is pocketing some of the money. And to quash those rumors and to appease the entire community, Moses gives a very detailed accounting and says, my fellow Jews, I want you to know, no one should have any inkling of a doubt of my integrity, because here I can tell you exactly what came in, exactly the expenses we had, and it matches up entirely. Now, when I learned this, I'm struck by two things. Number one, that people could suspect Moses. Moses was the person who took them out of Egypt. He was the man who ascended Mount Sinai, communicated with God. He's the one that shared with them the Ten Commandments. But he was missing, they resorted to a golden calf. He's the one that prayed for that forgiveness from the golden calf and saved the Jewish nation. This same Moses, people are suspecting him of siphoning off some calf. That's a little strange. On the flip side, then Moses would have to degrade himself to answer back to these people. Hey, this guy, hey, that people are murmuring and there are rumors. Why should Moses have to belittle himself to address these rumors? It's me then. You don't trust me. After all that, it's your issue. I've built enough trust. And so some commentaries point to a very simple idea that it shows that even the greatest leaders have to be held to account and no one's beyond suspicion. Everyone has to sort of have integrity and accountability. And we have to, no matter who you are, you should always have that, be an open book. Your books should be open. There should be, what's what I'm looking for?
These days they call it transparency all the time.
Transparency, yeah, sorry. Transparency, thank you. There should be transparency, even if obviously those suspect you, but there's a concept in Judaism Not only shouldn't you shouldn't do anything wrong, you shouldn't do anything that anyone could suspect you do something wrong. So part of making a kiddush Hashem, part of sort of living an upstanding life and being an example to the world is not only behaving morally, it's behaving in a way that no one should be able to suspect you being immoral. Taking extra precaution, even though who are these people, the voices, the rumors, at the end that you represent God, you're a rabbi, you're Moses, you represent a higher authority, that anyone should have such suspicions is already somewhat of a infringing on God's honor, and therefore Moses had to go to great lengths to give an accounting of what's going on. So sort of on a very simple level, why Moses would need to do this. Perhaps, looking at it a little more positively, the Jewish people had donated very generously to this cause. Moses asked, and they came forward to the point where they had to turn people away. Have you ever heard of a fundraising drive where they said people stop giving? We have a life. Never. But here in the Mishkan, they had too much material, too much gold, and they said to the Jewish people, please, we're closed for business. So the Jews are very generous. And perhaps Moses felt they were owed a reckoning and accounting. Not because of suspicion, but because to honor their contribution, they should know what they've achieved. I give, $18 or $1,800 or $18,000. You give it a nation. And so you have no suspicions, and I totally respect the cause, respect the person who's running this cause, but I don't necessarily know what I've done. I know I've contributed to a larger picture. I know I've been part. There's $1 million budget. My $18 is contributing to the $1 million budget. But if I can get the sort of feedback and say, by the way, your $18 fed a poor person a meal, and even more, if I can know that on Tuesday, on March 25th, this and this person had food to eat because of your contribution, then I feel so much better. I didn't just give $18 to a large pot. I didn't just, I actually helped someone. And the nation has an address that it fit. So perhaps Moses giving the Jewish people this was honoring them and sharing with them, don't just think you gave gold, and there's a mission happening here. No, your gold that you gave went to this bucket over here, went to this part of the Mishkan. The silver you gave went to these parts of the Mishkan. And so by giving an accounting, Moses was giving the Jewish people the impression or the realization that their specific donations actually were necessary and made a difference and had a specific address in the Mishkan that they helped create. So this is another lesson kind of for us. When people help us or people give to help them appreciate what they've achieved and give that feedback, not necessarily out of suspicion, but that gives a greater feeling of fulfillment and achievement to the giver, knowing exactly what they've accomplished and what they've caused, the impact they've made. And I think this point will be relevant more as we go through the Parsha, because it fits a certain theme that Parsha Pekudei in particular highlights. So that's point number one. Sort of topic item number one is always giving the accounting and why you would need to do that. Then the Parsha goes into the Jewish people finished creating the entire Mishkan. Right? So we've heard how God commanded Moses about Mishkan. Then we heard how Moses told the Sal of the Mishkan. And then how the Jewish people started collecting the materials and building it. And this week we hear how they finalized installing the Mishkan. They've built everything. They create the structure. They install each of the furniture, each of the pieces of vessels, and they begin working them, begin operating the Mishkan. And what's very interesting is a phrase that repeats itself again and again and again in this parsha is the Jewish people did what God had commanded Moses, what God had commanded them. Again and again, everything, they did this, they did it exactly as God had commanded. In fact, if you do a count, it's 18 times, maybe 19, depending what you include, that the Torah says it in this parsha, which the Talmud says is one of the reasons they instituted 18 blessings in the Amidah, in the Shemona Esrei. So the centerpiece of every prayer, every tefillah, is the Amidah, the standing prayer. We daven 3 times a day, we pray, and every weekday it's the same prayer in the morning, afternoon, evening, 18 blessings. Then later on, they added a 19th blessing. But the original one is 18 blessings, which goes back 2,000 years, this prayer. And the Talmud gives a number of reasons why they would have chosen 18 specifically. One of the reasons the Jerusalem Talmud suggests is that 18 times in this accounting, in this final stage of the Mishkan building, where it says the Jewish people did exactly as God said. That's an interesting little sidebar, but why would Torah repeat this again and again? First of all, say at the end of the whole thing, they built everything, they did this, did that, did that. Everything was done in accordance with what God said. Why would it have to
Can I interrupt?
Yeah. Sure.
Isn't there a line, a verse in one of the Parshas that says, "We hear and we will do," or something like that?
Yeah. So that's going back to Sinai, when Moses, asked the Jews, "You want the Torah?" He said, "Now it's definition, we will do and we will hear." So they put a sort of obedience before we know what it is, and we're here for it. Yeah. But here is they did this in accordance with how God commanded it. So they everything they did it in accordance to how God commanded. So the repetition is strange and uncharacteristic of Torah, where things are usually very concise. And here it's repeated again and again, and there must be some significance to this. And more than some significance, what's the connection to the daily prayers? Like the rabbis are looking to design a daily prayer, and they want to have a number of blessings. Why is the amount of times the Parsha says, as God commanded, when the Jews are building the Mishkan, relevant to how many prayers? They took a random number, a random count, and said, "Hey, we'll go with this." It must be a relationship between the Mishkan building, or specifically the Jewish people finalizing the installation of the Mishkan, and daily prayers. And the rabbis who were instituting the prayer looked for inspiration from this passage, from this parasha. So we're gonna try to understand a relationship between the Mishkan building and the parasha, and the Amidah, the daily prayers. Going along in the parasha, the next passage we have, once they built the whole thing, it didn't yet work. It wasn't yet functioning in the sense God's presence wasn't manifest. Moses blessed their work. So Moses completes the whole construction, and then the verse tells us, I'll quote it here exactly. Here. Here. Moses blessed their work. Yeah, here. It's chapter 39, verse
It's hard.
43.
It's hard to hear you. Your audio changed.
Chapter 39, verse 43. Is it?
Better. Chapter 39, verse which?
Verse 43. Moses saw that they had indeed done all the work exactly as God had commanded, and Moses blessed them. So he gave a blessing. The Torah doesn't talk what he blessed them with, but the Talmud, the Midrash says he blessed that he writes may it be God's will that His presence rest in your handiwork, and that was sort of brought about the final straw where they went and actually did the service, and God's presence rested, which is a very interesting idea, I think, in Judaism, but in life in general, that the effort doesn't always equal the results. We cannot control results. We have complete control over the process. I can do everything right. I can go through the steps I need to go through for success. I can put everything in position. But whether I'm actually successful is something outside of me. I can never control it. Two entrepreneurs can both be brilliant, both take great moves, buy different companies. One can make billions of dollars, and the other lose their paths. What happened differently? Both made sense. They did. Both had a vision. Sometimes success depends on factors beyond your control. And ultimately, it's a blessing. It's a blessing from God that we have success. So the Jews have been following the script. They did it as God told them. They did everything as God told them. They dotted every I, crossed every T. They did it perfectly. But there wasn't yet success, wasn't yet God's presence resting in their work. They did what they could do. That it should have a response. That they needed a blessing from Moses. And in life in general, to appreciate that is an incredible idea that everything to recognize the blessing, all our successes, all our joy, everything you have in life, as much as we've worked for it and worked hard for it and done everything right for it, that doesn't guarantee success. Success is a blessing from God, which is, incidentally why you put, it's a customary to put in the corner of a page or documents either Beis Hey, Baruch Hashem, or Beis HaMagdal, B'Siyat D'Shmaya, to recognize that everything I'm doing is a blessing by God. If without God's blessing, I won't be successful. And so here, the Jewish people had done all their efforts, but ultimately they didn't. They needed one more thing. They needed God's blessing for it to be successful. And indeed, it's totally successful. God's presence rested there in such a manifest way to a point where Moses was not able to enter the Mishkan. That's what right at the end of the Parsha. In chapter 40, verse 34, the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of God filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting since the cloud had rested on it and God's glory filled the tabernacle. So Moses couldn't even come in, and God's presence was so strong, so powerful, so manifest until in the next week's portion, the book of Vayikra opens up and God called to Moses. In other words, God said to Moses, don't be intimidated. I'm inviting you in. But we see just how successful they were in bringing God into this mission. And this culminates the Parsha and culminates the entire book of Exodus. So if you had to give a theme to the Parsha of Pekudei and see where it fits into the general context, I want to highlight one idea that ties everything together. But before I do that, I want to look at how it fits into the bigger picture of Exodus. The whole book is supposed to be a theme of Exodus, delivery, redemption, liberation. And we're celebrating a couple weeks on Pesach, this story. But if you look at the entire book, there's really kind of three parts to it. There's the first section, which is the slavery in Egypt, and then the 10 plagues, and eventually the exodus from Egypt. That's Act 1. The second act is now the Jews are free. What are they going to do with that? And so they have Mount Sinai and commandments in the Parsha that follow a list of many, many commandments. So now they're getting the directives, Judaism. So you have first the Jewish people. That's the Exodus story. Then you have Judaism, they're getting the mitzvahs, they're getting all the commandments, the Torah. And then the third section, the third act of Exodus is Mishkan building project, which finishes here. And that's about implementation, right? About bringing God into the world, about using our vision of Judaism to actually bring God's presence into the world. So that's, I think, a broad synopsis of the whole book of Exodus. That's how the Mishkan fits in to the story of redemption. Mishkan, and we spoke about this a couple weeks ago, Mishkan should belong in the next book of Leviticus. Exodus happens, the Jews are free, you get a Torah, and the story. The next passage is they build a Mishkan and they have sacrifices and offerings. Instead, the Mishkan building is included in the book of Exodus, and all the sacrifices and offerings and service and temple goes to the next book of Leviticus. And the idea is, this is part of the story of Exodus. What does it mean to be a free person as a Jew? What does it mean to live as a fulfilled life? It's not just about not being a slave to Pharaoh. That's kind of getting rid of the obstacle. But never, what can I achieve with my freedom? Where is it headed? That's the Torah. But more than that, it's bringing God into the world through the Mishkan. And so this is the storyline of Exodus from beginning to end. But Parsha Pekudei, our Parsha, adds one more layer to this. And it goes in two different directions. I'll tell you what I mean. If we compare it to previous parashas of Mishkan building, the big difference is the job gets finished over here. So whereas the
Is the what?
focus, the job gets finished.
Okay.
Whereas the focus till here was God commanding Moses, the vision for this, then Moses giving those directives, collecting the materials, even building the materials. That's all the prep work. That's all building up to something. The actualization of this vision, God's presence actually resting within the Jewish canon, is in Pekudei. And kind of the bottom line where everything lies, right? There's no point in building something if it's not going to work. There's no point in prepping a Mishkan, prepping a stage if it's never going to be a performance. So everything kind of is all leading towards this moment of actualization and God's presence actually resting. So in a sense, Pekudei is a realization of everything from beginning to Exodus, where it all comes in full circle. The Jews went through the suffering of slavery, went through liberation, received the Torah, all that God's presence will be manifested in them. And that is realized in the Mishkan. So in one sense, Pekudei sets itself apart from the rest of the portions in the fact that it is a realization of something. If God's presence is actually here, and it's not in a conceptual way, it's in a very real way. On the flip side, Pekudei is very focused on details, numbers, items, objects, in ways that previous parshas weren't even, right? The accounting. And so that seems to be very, almost the opposite focus. But we're not focusing on sort of the big picture and what's being achieved. It's a very strong focus on the details, on the lead up, on the steps to get there. So there's this kind of tension within Pekudei itself of these two ideas, and I think they're very linked. And not only aren't they in conflict, they actually go hand in hand. And this, I think, is the key message of this parasha Pekudei. The key message is the bottom line, the culmination of everything is in the details, getting things done. Sometimes we have a vision, an idea, and we get so caught up with the idea that we lose the forest for the trees. We lose the focus on what we're actually achieving because we're so caught up with the big picture. So we can have both ways. So lose the trees for the forest, really. What I mean is, you can have sometimes this like really strong vision, and you're so caught up in it, you're excited about it, you forget, well, to get there, you have to really do A, B, and C. Like these are important steps, or else you're never going to have that vision. Not only important steps towards the vision, the point of the vision is not your vision. It's what is going to affect in the real world. That's where really the bottom line lies. Not in your vision, not in how exciting it is, but in what is going to actually change, what's actually going to do, what is actually going to achieve in its specifics. So I have a vision of a way to solve world poverty. Let's imagine, right? It's incredible. I've figured out a solution to world poverty, and this hasn't worked. The bottom line is, until it helps poor people get food on the table, it's worthless. The moment its value is not in its problem-solving capability or capacity, its value lies in the fact that a poor person had a meal, and now they're all poor. So the implementation and the specifics of how it's going to have its effect, that's where It really lies. And you get so caught up in the problem and the solution and problem result, you lose sight of the poor person who needs the meal. And so Pekudei emphasizes, where is God going to be manifest in this world? How can I bring the divine, the infinite God into our finite world? Is not just through big initiatives, is not through incredible sweeping um, projects. It's going to be in every single detail. And so that's why every single part of the Mishkan the Jews built, you know what it says? They built it according to the specifications that God commanded. In every part of the building process, the specifics, the details, how the exact measurements, the Jewish people realized and found meaning and purpose in every single one of those details. Not just in the building of the Mishkan as a whole, they recognized the details are going to be meaningful, and therefore they emphasized in each thing they did was exactly according to the specification that God wanted. You notice in every detail, I am realizing the divine purpose in this small detail of the project that I am finishing here. And that was done every single detail of the project. It wasn't just about the idea, it was about implementing it and really being zoned in to what they were achieving, the specific details. That's Pekudei, that's the accounting. So Moses also felt the need to give an accounting. He's telling the Jewish people, it's not just about the big picture. It's every single dollar, every single donation you gave is valuable, is something specific that achieved something specific in his vision. It's not just a contribution to a bigger picture. The details are being emphasized again and again because the God is in the details. And that's where the Jewish people realize God's presence manifests. It's a very beautiful teaching about why, this is repeated again and again, the Mishkan. One idea is the Mishkan that God commanded Moses. It's a very conceptual idea. It sounds beautiful and it's very sort of holy. It's the idealized version of a Mishkan, the perfect version of Mishkan, how it can be envisioned. But then it's kind of the practical Mishkan the Jewish people built, which is obviously imperfect. It's built by human beings. It is very it's made out of physical materials. Probably wasn't perfect every single thing. Uh, that's the best the Jews could do. Their carpentry skills, they use the best of their abilities. And the Torah is telling us, don't think that sort of the idealized Mishkan, the Jewish people fell short of what could have been. And the best human effort, but it wasn't perfect. No, it's a different Mishkan. You're right. The Mishkan that God envisioned it, and the Mishkan the Jewish people built is different. Not worse, different. It's going to be the imperfect Mishkan that was the best of the human contribution, the best that the Jewish people could do. And that was perfect for them. That was the Mishkan they were supposed to build. We look at our lives, sometimes we think, well, there's something I could be doing. There's a vision for the world that I'm falling short. It's very depressing to think, what am I? Who am I? What am I really achieving? The little that I do is compared to what the idea is. No. If you are utilizing the best of your capacity and capabilities in the situations you're given and with the resources you're given, using it up, it may be flawed, it may be imperfect, it may be very human, but that is the Mishkan you built. That's perfect. And so Torah repeats the narrative again, tells us there's a second Mishkan. The Talmud actually calls this Parsha Mishkan Hasheni, the second Mishkan. Similar to the second tablets, right? The first tablets by God, given these perfect tablets. The second came out of brokenness, written by Moses from a human hand, and were a result of the Jewish people's brokenness. They were less perfect, but that less perfect was more perfect. Right? It's the difference between a photograph and a painting. When you take a photo of a scenery, it's capturing every single detail perfectly. Especially with high definition, you have a very good camera. You're getting every detail exactly in place, exactly how it was in the world is being reflected perfectly onto this image. It's impossible to be a mistake. The light's reflecting, it's seeing exactly as it is. Then you have a painting, an artist paints the same scenery. Of course, it's not exactly, and things are off. And is there even artistic license to purposely change things? So which is more precious? Which is more beautiful? Which is going to sell for more at auction? The painting. Why? Is less perfect. Why are you choosing a less perfect representation of that scenery as opposed to a exact representation of the photograph? And the answer is the imperfections is what creates the beauty. There's certain beauty in art that is character in it. The art is an invested meaning, content, emotion, precisely because it's a less perfect media, is what makes it more beautiful. It's real, has that human touch to it, has that very emotional draw to it. It's authentic. And that's the second Mishkan, where the Jewish people are not just, they're following the script, but they're trying their best to implement an idealized Mishkan. But the Torah keeps emphasizing the best they were trying is exactly as God commanded. It may have been different, but it was exactly what it was supposed to be. It was a human effort. It was the best human effort possible. That is the beauty. And that's where God's presence rested eventually. It's specifically in Pekudei, when we're dealing with the nitty-gritty, we're getting into the weeds, the numbers, the accounting, the details. That's when we find God's presence manifesting. That's when the Jewish people realized the vision, the dream of the Mishkan. When they had done everything they could in every detail, Moses said, I'm blessing your efforts. Because blessing is found in the space of perfection, of wholesomeness. Don't think your efforts are less than wholesome. If they were your best efforts, they're very wholesome. We say in the Shema, "V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha," love the Lord your God, v'chol levavcha, with all your hearts, v'chol nafshecha, with all your soul, v'chol ma'odecha, with all your might. And I know what I'm hearing. I know what the soul is. What is it? Your might. So the Talmud addresses each one of these saying, "V'chol levavcha," all your hearts. How many hearts do you have? Talmud says, kind of two. There's the Yetzer Tov, your positive inclination, your good side, your altruistic self. There's the Yetzer Hara, your selfish self, the ego-driven self. And love your God should be all-encompassing. Both sides of yourself should be included. With all your soul, the Talmud says, even if it means at the cost of your soul. In other words, be ready to give up your life for your love of God. Now, if we go in order, what can be more loving, more than ready to give up your life? The Talmud says, "B'chol ma'odecha" means "B'chol mamoncha," with all your money. Money is money more valuable than life. So yes, to certain people, and to all of us to degree, money is more valuable than life. When we find out to give up our life, and give up our savings account, because it's hard to part with money with power. But another idea, the B'chol ma'odecha can also mean an idea of infinite giving, infinite love, infinite sacrifice. Now, we have finite people. How is it possible for any of us to sort of have this infinite dedication to God? And in Chassidus, it explains something very beautiful. It's a very simple metaphor. When we make Kiddush on Shabbat, or Havdalah on Motzei Shabbat, it's customary to pour the wine that it overflows from the cup. Not just to fill the cup, but the overflow that it spills out. And the idea is, this is a cup of blessing. We allow blessings to overflow. Now, let me ask you a question. Let's say I have a 4-ounce glass. And I pour overflowing, so I pour 4.5 ounces. Wouldn't it be sort of what a lot of blessings? Use an 8-ounce glass and fill it 3/4 of the way. I've got 6 ounces. Isn't that more blessing than my small Kiddush cup overflowing? So we want to look, if the wine is representing blessing, and we want to have an increased blessing, enlarge your cup and fill it. Wine, no matter what kind of glass you have, I don't care what kind of Kiddush cup you have, as long as the minimum, 86 grams, we don't care what size, as long as when you pour overflow, the idea is overflowing, no matter how many cups, is symbolic of infinite. It doesn't fit the container. It's beyond what is fits here. So the symbolism of overflowing is not how much you have, it's all relative to the container. Relative to whatever container you have, you've gone beyond that. And in our own lives, what that can mean is when we ask a person for infinite dedication, we're not asking these people, we're asking whatever container you have, whatever your limits are, go a little beyond that. That is an expression of infinitude. You've pushed your nature beyond its limits. That's an infinite commitment to God. So, b'chol ma'odcha, we're asking when we pray, we say the Shema, I'm giving to God all my risking my life, but then more than risking, more than your life. Pushing yourself beyond your limits is in a way of greater sacrifice, a greater offering to God than even being willing to give up your life. It's almost harder to live for God than to die for God. Because dying for God is one moment decision. I'm going to risk my life for being a Jew. But day in, day out, committing myself beyond sort of what's comfortable to be a Jew, that's takes much more away. Eat your kitchen out. You got to push yourself constantly. It's a constant work, and I believe it. It's a real constant effort. And that's something very deep, very profound. And that's the blessing. Moses was saying, when you push yourself to your limits, when you do the best you can do, there's a blessing in that. That's when you overflow the cup. That's when you find the deepest relationship with God. Not in trying to be something you're not, in being whatever you are in the best way possible and a little beyond what you can do. And that's the Parsha of Pekudei, of the accounting that the Jewish people encountered, the details, and that led to the presence of God being manifest. Any questions before I move to the next point?
No, other than to say this is sensational.
Okay. There's no question. No, thank you. So there's more. So that's I think the point that this parasha is driving home, which fits all its themes, we're leading towards the idea is not the idea. The concept may be sort of objectively greater than the implementation. The implementation has a value and a beauty and a sacredness to it that is much beyond the concept. That's when God is manifest. That's where you find God in the specific details. That's where it's going to be manifest the presence of God. How does this tie into the Amidah? Right? We mentioned before that the 18 times the Jewish people, the Torah says about the Jews' effort as God commanded, ties into the 18 blessings of the Amidah, the 18 blessings of the daily prayers. Prayer is a very interesting part of Judaism. If you think about it,
You brought a very interesting, excuse me?
Part of our Jewish life, our Judaism.
Right. Okay.
So if you look at most of our Judaism, and especially we've been discussing in these parashas, is top down, right? God commands us, we follow. The Torah, we study God's wisdom. God gives a mitzvah, we do our best to implement it. So we are trying to sort of bring into this world, trying to appreciate and implement God's vision. That's kind of the tagline of Judaism. We're implementing God's vision for the world, right? Prayer is kind of the opposite direction moving. Prayer, I'm not trying to bring God into my life. Well, does that also, but really what prayer is doing is I'm trying to elevate myself. I'm trying to look at my world and see, can I improve myself? Can I get better? What do I need in this world? And how can I connect it with God? We are we are moving in the opposite direction. I'm not starting from God and seeing how I can implement it into a flawed world. I'm starting with the flawed world myself, beginning inside here and saying, how can I elevate this to God? How can I move from within the world I see, in myself that I know, and somehow connect it with God? So it's the opposite direction of mitzvahs and of Torah. It's instead of a top-down sort of approach, It's the opposite. I'm from within the world. And I'm with prayer means I'm starting from a point where I know myself, I'm aware of who I am, I'm aware of my life, I have problems in my life. Now I'm looking to move beyond that, looking to move above the problems, rise above them, looking to connect myself with something deeper with God. I'm meditating on the prayer, I'm connecting with the elevated self. I'm trying to rise above my flawed self and connect who I am with something deeper, more profound. In other words, prayer is very much recognizing the details and the very humanness of our reality. Whereas Torah kind of, in some ways, ignoring it, right? When I take cowhide and use it for tefillin, what I'm really saying is a cowhide is not just cowhide, it's a mitzvah. So I'm kind of disregarding the materiality of the world and saying there's something deeper that there's godly presence, there's divine potential in the world. I'm trying to sort of, I'm not looking at the coarseness of the world, I'm trying to ignore it or elevate it. And prayer is very much taking into account the details. I'm looking at how the world is in a flawed way. I'm looking at my problems. And I'm saying, how do I connect those to God? How do I find God, find meaning in these areas of my life that need help? Health and success. I'm looking at these different elements. Every part of the prayer is a different part of our life, from health to success in business to wisdom to all different, to peace for Mashiach, all the different things we pray for. And what I'm looking at is I'm looking at every detail and saying, how can I, within that part of my life, connect with God to channel blessing there? And so when the rabbis were looking to institute prayer on a daily basis with a set text, they said, where do we find a similar theme in Torah that we can draw inspiration from? And say, well, specifically in the implementation of the Mishnah, where the Jews, every detail they built, they looked at that detail and said, this is exactly what God wanted, this is how I'm building it, is going to be this conduit for God's presence. The rabbis felt this is a good parallel. And so we're going to build and structure the Amidah with 18 blessings, reflecting the 18 specific times the Jews did something in the real world, in the best way they could do. But notice this is exactly how Hashem commanded it. And I'm going to do the same thing, our blessings of the Amidah every day. I'm looking at those areas of my life and I'm saying, they may be full, but I'm going to find in them exactly what God commanded them. I'm going to connect them with a deeper reality. And that's how prayer works, right? We're changing God's mind. Are we saying, God, that person is sick, you made a mistake, please change your mind, make him better? I mean, yes, we are doing that, but really there's something deeper here as well. When I'm praying for a person in my blessing of health, I'm looking at that sort of very imperfect part of the world, and I'm trying to connect it with the source in God. And by doing so, I'm creating a conduit of blessing in that person for their health. And so I'm elevating that reality, noticing it, and seeing this also fits into God's world. And I'm finally connecting it to its source. And therefore, I'm channeling blessing into that specific item, object, person that I'm praying for. And so I'm connecting a flawed piece of existence. I'm connecting a very material human reality of existence with God and creating that conduit. That's exactly what the Jews did in the Mishnah. And so it makes sense the rabbis looked there or here for inspiration in how to structure the prayers. And this brings us a full circle of the book of Exodus, because the Jews went to Egypt, they went down, we're told the first thing they did, the first thing the Torah tells us is their names, enumerates all the Jews that went down, 70 people. Rashi says, God counted them because he loved them. It's the idea of counting the detail of every specific person. Wasn't a family went down, it's Yaakov went down, or the Ruvain and Shimon. Every individual mattered. When you love someone, or God loves Jewish people, he wasn't looking as a whole. So like, I have 5 kids, all right? 5 kids. I missed one, I still have 4 out of 5. No, each one's a world, right? Each one's, it's not a group. It's every single one of them is precious. And so that's how the book starts off when the Jews going into slavery, going to Egypt, was noticing the preciousness of every individual. And that's kind of full circle where those individuals, their family, the great grandchildren, are noticing the preciousness of every individual object that they're encountering in the Mishkan. And I'll finish with this, something very beautiful. And I'm still working on this because I haven't found a commentary that addresses this head on, but I'm still looking. But something I've noticed, the end of each of the books of Torah, starting from Exodus, not Parsha, is different because the Jews weren't introduced yet, there were no Jewish people yet. But Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The last verse of each of them is kind of brings it all together. And not only
Say it
again,
again.
the
Say it
last
again. You broke up
verse,
a little.
sorry, the last verse brings it all together, and it is almost a summary. And each of these verses mention the Jewish people. So I'll read them, and it's interesting to see how they relate to the book which they're summarizing. So the last verse of Exodus in this Parsha, for the cloud of God was above the tabernacle by day, and the fire would be there by night, visible to the entire house of Israel at all their journeys. So God's presence was in the Mishkan, fire in the cloud, visible to all the Jewish people on all their journeys. Right? So it's emphasizing to all the Jewish people. And you see that's a theme of each of these books finished with mentioning how something affected all the Jewish people, which is an interesting thing. But here it's specifically the cloud of glory being in a temple in Mishkan, visible to all the Jews. If you go to the end of the book of Leviticus, the last verse of Pekudei, and this is chapter 27, verse 34. These are the commandments that God commanded Moses to tell the Israelites at the foot of Sinai. So all the book finishes off. These are the commandments that God told to Moses, tell the Jewish people at Sinai. We go to Numbers, last verse of Numbers, and here, this is chapter 36, verse 13. These are the commandments and the ordinances that God commanded the Israelites through Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan River opposite Jericho. Right? So this is the second sort of stage of commandments when the Jews are on the border of Israel. That's how this book finishes. But again, God, the commandments that God told Moses to the Jewish people, all the Jews are included. And then the last book of Deuteronomy, the last verse here, in the Zos HaBracha, we read this on Simchat Torah. This is chapter 34, verse 12. Speaking in the context is there's never a prophet like Moses, nor with regard to the strong hands, nor with regard to the miracles, the great miracles in the awesome desert, which Moses did in view of all of Israel. So here it's referring to, Rashi said, referring to breaking the tablets that Moses did in front of all the Jewish people. But again, it's emphasizing all the Jewish people and Moses. But it's about here breaking the tablets in front of all the people. So there's a similarity between each of these four and a difference. Similarity is it's all the Jewish people, something affected by Moses that affected all the Jews. The difference is what specifically it's referring to. Exodus is about the cloud of glory on the Mishkan. Leviticus is about the mitzvahs the Jewish people received at Sinai. Numbers, the commandments the Jewish people received at the border of Israel next to Jericho. And Leviticus and Deuteronomy is the Jewish people seeing Moses destroy the tablets. So I think there's a lot to say over here. But one thing I want to highlight, I think it's interesting, and two things I want to highlight is number one, there's a difference. We think of Exodus, we have the Ten Commandments, the giving of the mitzvahs, but ultimately it's summarized. It's not about the Jewish people hearing commandments from Moses, but the Jewish people sensing God's presence in the Mishkan. That is the culmination of Exodus. That's the realization of this whole book. Is not knowing what to do. The mitzvah is knowing what to do. The cloud of glory in the Mishkan is it being done. So the mitzvah is almost a stepping stone. The Mishkan is the implementation of that. And that's how this whole book is summarized. Leviticus is already, the service in the temple. That's, the work that has to be done. That's the mitzvah of the Jews to the Sinai. And the different ones, we'll get there when we get to those parashas. So that's one interesting thing. I think so. How Torah chooses to summarize this book, this last verse. The second very interesting thing is what the name the Jewish people are given in this verse. In an unusual way,
Say it
usually
again. Sorry,
the
you
name,
broke up.
oh,
Can
sorry,
you say that again?
yeah, the title the Jewish people are given in this verse is different to the usual. Usually it's Yisrael, Bnei Yisrael. Here they are called Beis Yisrael, the house of Israel. So it's an interesting term, and usually Beis means a house or a family. It's a reference to a family, and we've had this in uh, Exodus before as well by the Sinai. God tells Moses, "Go tell Beis Yaakov, the house of Jacob." So referencing the Jews, their house, is I think unique to Exodus, and it's emphasizing, I think, the family, the individual Jews, as opposed to looking at them as a whole and nation, look at them as a family, as a group of individuals, as people. And I think that fits the theme very well of Pekudei specifically. When God told the Jews, we're finishing, you came down to Egypt as a family, as a specific individual, 70 people. It wasn't yet a big nation, big picture who's changed the world. It was a small group of people, a home, a house, a family. And even all said and done, where we've changed the world, there's been an Exodus, we've got the Torah, and we're building a Mishkan, don't lose sight of the value of the individual, of the small picture. And the presence of God, which you're experiencing in the temple, was seen by Beis Yisrael, by the Jewish people who realized themselves individuals, as families, as small units, as recognizing the value in the on the ground, in the lived reality, and in the small picture. And that's the bottom line of this whole book. That's where it all finishes, and everything's encapsulated in that one verse. That's what we have for today.
Spectacular. And it's funny to say, I've often looked at Exodus, I mean, using the Greek word for it and what it implies. And I've always thought it's funny. Exodus is just part of the Exodus story. There is the receiving of the